There are places on this planet where the laws that govern most of us simply stop applying, not because governments have forgotten about them, not because they are too remote to police, but because through historical accident, political stalemate, or deliberate design, these inhabited territories exist in a kind of legal twilight. People live there, children are born there, businesses operate there. And yet the outside legal systems that surround them have no authority to enter, no power to enforce, no jurisdiction to claim. Drop a comment right now telling us which country you are watching from and whether you have ever been to a place that felt outside normal rules. We want to know how far this reaches. Among the 10 places on this countdown, number 1 operates under a system so unusual that even the government that technically owns the land has acknowledged it cannot enter without permission from people who hold no official title. Not a disputed border, not a military exclusion zone, something stranger than both. This countdown runs from 10 down to 1, and every entry gets more difficult to explain than the last. Kowloon Walled City stood in Hong Kong until 1993, but while it existed, it was the most densely populated place on Earth, and operated for decades in a legal void that neither Britain nor China would touch. The site began as a Chinese military fort in the late 1800s. When Britain leased the new territories in 1898, the treaty explicitly excluded the walled city, leaving it under Qing jurisdiction. But when the Qing dynasty collapsed, no one filled the gap. Britain did not claim it, China could not enforce anything there, and so it grew. By the 1980s, over 33,000 people lived inside a space roughly the size of a city block. Buildings rose 14 stories with no architects, no permits, no inspections. Corridors connected everything in darkness because sunlight could not reach the interior. Doctors operated clinics without licenses. Factories ran without regulation. Restaurants served food prepared in rooms the health department could not inspect because the health department had no legal authority to enter. Electrical wiring was installed by residents with no training. Water came from rooftop tanks fed by pipes no agency had mapped. Police rarely entered. When they did, they went in groups and did not stay long. For decades, this was not an abandoned ruin. It was a functioning neighborhood where children went to school and families celebrated New Year and people got married and had entire lives. Researchers from the University of Hong Kong documented it extensively before demolition. What they found was not chaos. It was order that had emerged without any legal framework at all. Kowloon was dismantled in the early 1990s and turned into a park. But for more than half a century, it was home to tens of thousands of people living under no government authority whatsoever. At least Kowloon eventually ended. The next place has been operating in legal limbo for over a century and shows no signs of stopping. Slab City sits on the eastern edge of California, a few miles from the Salton Sea, and it is the last free place in America. Not free in any poetic sense. Free in the sense that no one collects rent, no one enforces codes, and no agency patrols it. The land is owned by the state of California. It was once a Marine training base called Camp Dunlap, decommissioned after World War II. The military left, the concrete slabs remained, and people started showing up. Today, between 150 and 200 people live there year-round. That number swells to several thousand in winter when snowbirds arrive in RVs. There is no grid electricity, no running water, no sewer system, no trash collection, no police presence, no fire department. Residents generate power with solar panels or generators. Water comes from tanks they fill in nearby towns. Waste is buried or hauled away by whoever produces it. There are no property lines because no one owns the land they occupy. Structures range from RVs to shacks built from scrap. Some have lived there for decades. The county sheriff has jurisdiction on paper, but Slab City is not patrolled regularly and response times can exceed an hour. Disputes are settled between residents or not settled at all. There is a makeshift stage called the Range where people perform, a structure called East Jesus made entirely from trash and salvage. A former water tank painted by a resident named Leonard Knight, covered floor to ceiling in religious messages and now called Salvation Mountain. Documentaries have been filmed there. Journalists visit regularly. The state of California knows it exists and has made no move to reclaim the land or force anyone to leave. Slab City is not outside the United States. It is inside the United States operating as though it is not. It is legal abandonment by inertia. No one governs it because no one has decided it is worth the cost to govern, and the people there prefer it that way. Slab City is anarchy by neglect. The next place is anarchy by design. Christiania occupies 85 acres in the heart of Copenhagen, Denmark, and has been a self-proclaimed autonomous zone since 1971. It began when squatters moved into abandoned military barracks in the Christianshavn neighborhood. The Danish government did not immediately evict them. The squatters declared the area a free town, established their own rules, and began governing themselves. Over 50 years later, Christiania still operates under laws that apply nowhere else in Denmark. The most visible difference is Pusher Street, where cannabis is sold openly in defiance of Danish law. Vendors set up stalls, buyers walk up in daylight. Danish police have raided Christiania many times, but enforcement is inconsistent and the market always returns. The residents of Christiania argue they are not breaking Danish law because Danish law does not apply inside their borders. The Danish government disagrees but has never succeeded in shutting the community down permanently. Christiania has its own flag, its own governance structure based on consensus decision-making. No private property is allowed inside. Residents collectively own buildings and land. Cars are banned except for loading and emergencies. Around 1,000 people live there. The area includes homes, workshops, art galleries, cafes, music venues, and a lake. It is not a hidden compound. It is open to visitors. Thousands of tourists walk through every week. The Danish Supreme Court ruled in 2011 that Christiania must purchase the land from the state or face eviction. Residents raised money and bought portions of it. Legal battles continue, but Christiania has survived every attempt to normalize it. It remains a place where Danish law is selectively ignored, selectively enforced, and never fully applied, and Copenhagen has learned to live with that contradiction. Christiania endures because Denmark has decided the cost of eliminating it exceeds the cost of tolerating it. The next place endures because two countries have spent decades unable to agree on who is responsible for it. The Bur Tawal Triangle is a 2,060 square kilometer patch of desert along the border between Egypt and Sudan, and it is one of the only inhabited land areas on Earth that no country claims. The border dispute that created Bur Tawal goes back to colonial administration. In 1899, Britain drew a political boundary between Egypt and Sudan along the 22nd parallel. In 1902, Britain drew a separate administrative boundary that moved the line to give Egypt access to better grazing land and Sudan access to the coast. The two borders do not match. The 1899 line places the valuable Halab Triangle on the Sudanese side. The 1902 line places it on the Egyptian side. Both Egypt and Sudan claim Halab because it has coastline and resources. And because each country uses the border that favors them for Halab, both are stuck using the opposite border for Bur Tawal. Egypt uses the 1899 line, which puts Bur Tawal in Sudan. Sudan uses the 1902 line, which puts Bur Tawal in Egypt. Neither country will claim Bur Tawal because doing so would mean giving up their claim to Halab. The result is a patch of desert that appears on maps as belonging to no one. It is not uninhabited. Bedouin tribes have grazed livestock there for centuries. They move through the area seasonally, living in conditions governed by tribal custom, not state law. No government collects taxes there. No police enforce laws there. No courts have jurisdiction. Several individuals have traveled to Bur Tawal and planted flags claiming to have founded micronations, but none of these claims are recognized by any government, and none have resulted in permanent settlement. The Bedouin who actually live and work there are not concerned with sovereignty. They exist in a space where two countries have created a legal vacuum by both refusing to claim the same piece of land. Bur Tawal is not disputed territory. It is disclaimed territory, and that makes it almost unique in the world. At least Bur Tawal is remote. The next place sits inside one of the most visited regions on the planet and operates under rules no surrounding government will touch. The Svalbard archipelago lies halfway between mainland Norway and the North Pole, and it is governed by one of the strangest treaties in modern international law. The Svalbard Treaty of 1920 recognizes Norwegian sovereignty over the islands, but grants citizens of all signatory nations equal rights to live, work, and conduct business there without visas or work permits. Norway administers Svalbard but cannot treat it as fully Norwegian territory. It cannot restrict access. It cannot favor Norwegians over foreigners in employment or settlement. It cannot use the islands for military purposes, and it cannot impose normal Norwegian tax law. Around 2,600 people live on Svalbard, most of them in the town of Longyearbyen. The population includes Norwegians, Russians, Thais, Swedes, Germans, and others. Russian citizens operate the mining settlement of Barentsburg under the same treaty protections. Norwegian law applies in theory, but enforcement is complicated because people from dozens of countries live there under treaty protection, not immigration law. The governor of Svalbard represents the Norwegian government, but the governor cannot deport treaty nationals for simply being present. There is no conscription, no value-added tax, no inheritance tax, no birth services because Norway discourages giving birth there to avoid questions of automatic citizenship. Longyearbyen has a hospital, but expectant mothers are flown to the mainland before delivery. There is also no dying. The graveyard stopped accepting bodies decades ago because permafrost prevents decomposition and preserved remains attract polar bears. Residents who become terminally ill are sent to the mainland. Svalbard is Norwegian in name but international in practice. It is a treaty zone where normal sovereignty does not apply, and every signatory nation has the right to access and settle without Norwegian approval. Norway cannot say no. That is written into the treaty, and it has been that way for over a century. Svalbard is governed but not controlled. The next place is not governed at all. Freetown Christiania is not the only autonomous zone in Europe. Across the continent, several squatter communities have operated for decades with limited or no interference from local authorities. but one of the most enduring examples is the Zone Défender, or ZAD, near Nantes in northwestern France. The ZAD began in 2009 as a protest against the construction of a new airport on agricultural land. Activists, environmentalists, and farmers occupied the site. They built cabins, gardens, workshops, and communal kitchens. The French government attempted evictions multiple times, deploying thousands of riot police and demolishing structures, but the occupiers rebuilt. The standoff continued for years. In 2018, the French government officially canceled the airport project. Instead of leaving, many residents stayed. They had created a functioning community operating outside state control. The ZAD is not legally recognized. The land is still owned by the state and private parties, but efforts to clear it have been only partially successful. At its height, several hundred people lived there. That number has fluctuated, but a core population remains. Residents farm, raise animals, bake bread, generate power, and govern by assembly. French police enter occasionally but do not maintain a permanent presence. Some residents have been arrested, some structures have been destroyed. But the ZAD persists as a space where French law is contested daily and state authority is not automatic. It exists because the cost of removing it has been judged too high relative to the political will to do so. The ZAD is not outside France. It is inside France, operating as though the state is optional, and France has not yet decided what to do about that. At least the ZAD is a recent creation. The next place has been operating outside normal legal structures for over 500 years. The Republic of Caspia was a tiny independent state that existed by accident for 385 years, and it is one of the clearest historical examples of a territory that survived solely because no government claimed it. In 1441, Pope Eugene IV sold a section of land to the Republic of Florence. The sale documents described the borders using 2 rivers, but the surveyors made an error. They left a gap roughly 4 kilometers long and less than 1 kilometer wide. The Vatican did not own it anymore, Florence did not own it, and no one noticed for decades. By the time anyone realized, the people living in the village of Caspia had declared themselves independent. Caspia had no army, no police, no taxes, no codified legal system. Decisions were made by the heads of families in informal councils. The economy was based almost entirely on tobacco, which Caspia grew and sold to surrounding regions where it was taxed or banned. Caspia became a smuggling hub. It minted no currency. It signed no treaties. It had no diplomatic relations. But it survived because neither the Papal States nor Tuscany wanted to fight over a strip of land that generated no revenue and cost more to administer than it was worth. Caspia was not recognized by any other nation. It simply existed in a crack between borders. In 1826, after nearly 4 centuries, the Papal States and Tuscany finally agreed to divide the territory between them. Caspia was annexed peacefully, its residents compensated with membership in the newly formed parishes. But for 385 years it had been a place where no outside government had authority, and the people who lived there governed themselves by custom and mutual agreement. Caspia is gone now. The next place is very much still here. If you're still watching, subscribe and turn notifications on, because the final 3 entries are the most legally paradoxical places on this list. A city where 500,000 people live under laws written by no state. A valley where environmental protesters have held territory against a national government for 15 years. And the most unique jurisdiction in the world, where a population of monks holds sovereignty no outside power dares violate. Liberland is a micronation claiming a 7 square kilometer parcel of land along the Danube River between Croatia and Serbia. The land is on the western bank of the river, which would normally place it in Croatia. But Croatia uses a cadastral border that places the parcel in Serbia. Serbia uses the river as the border, which places it in Croatia. Neither country claims it. In 2015, Czech politician Vít Jedlička declared the area the Free Republic of Liberland, raising a flag and drafting a constitution. Liberland claims to be a sovereign nation based on libertarian principles. It has issued hundreds of thousands of citizenships, mostly honorary. It has a website, a cryptocurrency, representatives who travel to conferences, but no permanent population. Croatian police prevent access to the land. Anyone attempting to reach it by boat or land is turned back or detained. Jedlička himself has been arrested multiple times for attempting to enter. Croatia does not claim the land but will not allow Liberland to occupy it. Serbia has remained officially silent. Liberland exists in documents online and in the minds of people who hold its citizenship. It does not exist on the ground, but it highlights the same legal paradox that created Caspia and Bur Tawil. A piece of land that no recognized state will claim and no recognized state will allow anyone else to claim either. Liberland is a nation that cannot be visited by its own citizens. At least Liberland wants to be governed. The next place has spent a millennium refusing exactly that. Mount Athos occupies a peninsula in northern Greece, and it is the only place on Earth where an autonomous theocratic republic exists inside a European Union member state. The peninsula is home to 20 Eastern Orthodox monasteries and around 2,000 monks. It has been self-governing since 972 AD, when the Byzantine emperor granted it independence. That status has survived the fall of the Byzantine Empire, Ottoman occupation, and Greek statehood. Today, Mount Athos is recognized in the Greek constitution and European Union law as a self-governing territory. Greece handles foreign affairs and defense. Everything else is governed by the Holy Community, a council of representatives from the monasteries. Mount Athos has its own police, its own customs, its own agricultural production, and its own law that bans all women from entering, not just from living there, from setting foot on the peninsula at all. The ban, called Avaton, has been in place for over 1,000 years and applies to female animals as well, with exceptions for cats and hens. Greek law does not apply this restriction anywhere else. EU gender equality law does not apply on Mount Athos because the EU treaties explicitly exempt it. The European Parliament has debated this. Legal scholars have challenged it. The ban remains. Visitors must obtain a permit, and only a limited number are issued each day. Photography is restricted. Monks follow the Julian calendar, which is 13 days behind the Gregorian calendar used by the rest of Greece. Mount Athos is not a metaphor. It is not a heritage site operating under special tourism rules. It is a theocratic state with legal sovereignty recognized by Greece and the European Union. Greek police cannot enter the monasteries without permission. Greek courts do not have automatic jurisdiction over internal monastic matters. The monks govern themselves under a system that predates the modern Greek state by centuries. No outside government has legal authority there unless the monks consent, and they rarely do. Mount Athos endures because it was granted autonomy so long ago that revoking it would require rewriting centuries of treaties, church law, and constitutional protections. Greece cannot touch it. The EU cannot touch it, and the 2,000 men who live there intend to keep it that way. At least Mount Athos is remote and small. The final place is neither. The City of London is not the same as London. It is a 1.12 square mile area inside Greater London, home to around 8,000 residents and 500,000 daily workers, and it operates under a system of governance so unusual that even the British Parliament acknowledges it cannot fully control what happens there. The city, as it is known, is one of the oldest continuously governed municipalities in the world. Its privileges date back to William the Conqueror, who granted it independence in 1067 in exchange for its support. Those privileges have never been revoked. The city is governed by the City of London Corporation, which predates Parliament and operates under rules that apply nowhere else in the UK. It has its own police force, the City of London Police, separate from the Metropolitan Police. It elects its leader, the Lord Mayor of London, through a system that gives votes to businesses, not just residents. Corporations operating in the city get votes proportional to their number of employees. This means companies effectively vote in city elections, a practice banned everywhere else in Britain. The city has its own representative in Parliament, the Remembrancer, whose job is to protect the city's interests. The Remembrancer is the only unelected person allowed to sit in the House of Commons during debates. UK financial regulations apply to the city only after consultation with the corporation. Laws passed by Parliament do not automatically extend to the city unless explicitly stated. For centuries, the reigning British monarch has asked permission to enter the city during ceremonial visits. This is tradition, but it reflects the legal reality that the city governs itself. The City of London is the center of one of the largest financial industries in the world. Trillions of pounds flow through it annually, and it operates under a medieval system of corporate governance that has been repeatedly criticized as undemocratic, opaque, and resistant to reform. Parliament knows this. Journalists have documented it extensively. Campaigners have called for abolition of the corporation. But the city remains untouched because the political will to dismantle a 1,000-year-old institution embedded in the British financial system does not exist. The City of London is not a rogue state. It is a state within a state, operating under laws no other part of the United Kingdom follows. And Britain allows it because the alternative is a constitutional fight no government has been willing to start. The city governs itself with the consent of Parliament, but Parliament does not govern the city. 10 places, 7 countries, and a single thread connecting all of them. Governments draw borders, write laws, and claim jurisdiction. But in these places, for reasons ranging from historical accident to deliberate design, those claims stop at the edge. Some are tolerated because removing them costs more than allowing them to exist. Some are protected by treaties older than the nations around them. Some exist in gaps no one wants to close. And some have simply refused to be governed and survived long enough that the refusal became fact. Which place would you live in if you had no other choice? Tell us in the comments. The next video explores places where people live in conditions more extreme than anywhere on this list. You will not believe what they endure. But before you go, think about what these places really represent. They are not just curiosities or historical footnotes. They are living laboratories of human organization. In each of them, people wake up, go to work, raise families, and navigate daily life under systems that official law says should not exist. Yet they do, every single day. That contradiction tells us something profound about how power actually works in the world. Laws are not self-executing. Borders are not self-enforcing. Governments need to allocate resources to maintain control, and sometimes the calculation is simple. The cost of enforcement exceeds the benefit of compliance, so these places persist in the margins. Some thrive, some barely survive, but all of them demonstrate that the neat systems we imagine governing the world are far messier in practice than anyone admits. There is also something deeply human about these places. Whether it is the monks of Mount Athos preserving a thousand-year-old tradition, or the residents of Slab City choosing freedom over comfort, or the families of Kowloon building community in the darkest alleys of a walled city, people find ways to organize themselves. They create meaning and order even when official institutions refuse to provide it. Sometimes that order is peaceful and beautiful. Sometimes it involves cannabis markets and smuggling routes, but it is order nonetheless. These 10 locations exist because of specific historical circumstances that will never repeat exactly. The colonial boundaries that failed to match in Bur Towel cannot be redrawn now without international war. The treaties that protect Mount Athos and Svalbard were signed when the world was fundamentally different. The legal gap that allowed Caspia to exist for 385 years was finally closed when two governments finally bothered to agree on a border. The accidents of geography and policy that created these places are unrepeatable, but the principle they illustrate remains relevant everywhere. Authority depends on consent, at least partially, and consent is not automatic. It is negotiated, maintained, and sometimes withdrawn. The people who live in these places have negotiated differently with power than most. They have found cracks in systems and lived through them. They have refused or been refused, and built something functional in the refusal. Understanding these places means understanding something crucial about how the world actually works beneath the official maps and legal codes we are taught to respect. Which is why they matter, which is why they endure, and which is why you should subscribe to see what comes next.